Okay, Katrina. So this is Dr. Ricky Telg, again, a reluctant co-author who's agreed to step in at the last minute.
There's probably some type of novel title for that, but we're reluctant presenters. Well, good morning, everyone. Depending on where we all are, I think we're all good morning. Again, I'm Ricky Telg at the University of Florida, and as Grady said, I thought the video was uploaded, but not. And so I've learned through this process, always be sure to have a plan B. Unfortunately, this is plan C. So what I would like to say is I will provide a little bit of an overview of Dr. Moses Mike's dissertation research, and then if you have any questions in general, I'll be happy to talk to you about overall his work. There was an article in JIAE related to this as well. So Moses is now at Cal Poly, and so what he did his dissertation on was to go to his home country in Trinidad. And if you're not familiar with where Trinidad is, it's in the Caribbean, and it is prone to flooding. And so his research really focused on Tropical Storm Karen. And so if you're not familiar with the hurricane season in the Caribbean, where Trinidad is that typically the country does not get hurricanes per se, a lot, but it gets a lot of moisture, a lot of flooding from different storms. And so the Tropical Storm Karen really just went through Trinidad in 2019. And so what ended up happening is that the extension is called upon many times during the flooding issues there in Trinidad to focus on not only the agricultural population, but also the population of Trinidad in general. And so what Moses wanted to do with his research was to identify the disaster preparedness and response and recovery training and programming that went on with extension in Trinidad. Specifically, what this presentation was to focus on was some of the things that we sometimes don't think about in terms of disaster preparedness and activation, and that is the emotional issues that many of the extension faculty deal with. And so in his research, he interviewed both what we would call extension agents in the United States, but the extension faculty, extension directors, and an extension manager, and also did concept mapping. I provided a question to them and had them draw pictures about these issues about preparedness and response. And one of the things that came out over and over again in the research was how not only were they not prepared in terms of the training, but also the impact themselves that they felt emotionally and also physically based on the flooding, and again, in this case, specifically Tropical Storm Karen, but also dealing with the emotional and psychological issues of those who they work with, the agriculturalists around the country, and not being prepared to work with them and help them through their issues, not only with all the paperwork that goes into the disaster recovery and dealing with the Ministry of Agriculture and all of that, but also just dealing with the day-to-day emotional trauma of what was going on there. And so that was the title of the stresses and the vicarious traumatization of agricultural extension professionals in responding to Tropical Storm Karen. And so what Moses found is that in the future, not only in Trinidad, but also in any area where extension is called upon to deal with and focus on and help to mitigate the disasters in their areas, that there needs to be some type of training program to help them be able to communicate and also to deal with and to respond with the issues that their agriculturalists, the farmers in their areas also are dealing with. And so he maps out a specific type of program that he would recommend based on what he found in his research. And so that would also deal with not only the physical issues with the paperwork and all that, but also training on how to respond to the emotional aspects of what was happening in Trinidad. So with that, I'll be happy to open it up to any questions that you have.
Let's congratulate Ricky for that. I mean, he had literally 25 minutes of prep time.
less than that.
And so if you have specific questions for Ricky, or maybe you have some other experiences or comments related to the role of extension in disaster recovery, so let's just have a discussion. We have probably, what, Katrina, 10, 12 minutes left?
14.
14 minutes.
Yeah.
So questions for Ricky or comments?
Yes.
Just two. One of them is, I've worked in extension systems around the world, and I think what you're saying is true, that in times of a crisis, they're the people with boots on the ground, field offices everywhere, so it's often called upon. But I don't know if they're always prepared for it, so I think this is really a good point. The other thing is, the extension service isn't too big there, right? Maybe there's 50 extensionists, maybe 100 or something.
Correct.
That's an interesting case for me to look at, because when you look at it like the US or China or someplace, it's too vast, but this is a very concrete set of people. That's
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. It is not very large, and they have to deal with a large area, even though the country is fairly small. But when you're talking 50 individuals, even with an island country, it's a lot of geography. And when you're dealing with, in this case, a flooding issue that continually perpetuates itself, getting to those more remote areas is also very difficult. Part of the reason why Moses kind of gravitated to me for his research was the back research that we have done in Florida with hurricane preparedness specifically. As you may all be aware, Florida gets hit by hurricanes frequently, and so most of our extension faculty around the state also are in the same situations we found with Trinidad, where they are boots on the ground, almost first responders. They may not be first responders as we define that, like with emergency management, but they really are first responders, focusing on the specific aspects of the needs in their communities. Many of them are part of the emergency management operations of their counties or their regions. And so being able to identify those areas where they can improve upon how they respond and how they themselves can be even more prepared emotionally, that is one of the biggest areas that we found in previous research in Florida related to hurricane preparedness and recovery, is not being prepared for the emotional issues that go along with not only how they're impacted, but also those who they work with, particularly in their areas. Absolutely. Yes.
I apologize. I have 3 questions for you.
Hey, I'll take them all.
So, one, did he only focus in Trinidad, not in Tobago?
Trinidad, yes.
Okay. The second one was...
And the reason why is that even though they are on one island, that
One nation, two islands.
one nation, two islands, that their ministries of agriculture are different.
Yeah, Tobago has its own separate system.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The second one is, were the results of this study presented to the Ministry of Agriculture?
No, they have not been.
Do you know?
To my knowledge.
Does he plan to?
He does. He
Okay.
does. Yes, he does.
Okay. And then my third question is, oftentimes when extension staff or technicians are interviewed and asked questions, they answer differently than administrators, and I'm wondering if Moses found the same.
With the administrator, the directors, as well as the others,
Yeah.
what was interesting with what he did find was that the directors probably gave more detail than even what we would call the agents, the field the field representatives there too, about the needs for having even some type of training program for the field faculty there too.
Okay.
So yeah.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Just follow up. Grady mentioned conversation. State of Texas, the legislature put in a budget item to hire 19, I think they're called DARs, disaster and recovery agents that are regional. And so they coordinate with the local agents on any natural disaster and recovery. Could be hurricanes. Right now we have wildfires in our part of the state as we came here, or floods. And so that's a very, I don't know how unique it is, but those individuals answer to someone and AgriLife Extension directly and court. Anyway, it's amazing. And they have developed what's called a strike team. So when people in Florida, California have issues, then that strike team goes to other states to help those agents manage. Anyway, it's just phenomenal. And to me, it speaks to we talk about needs assessments all the time, right? There's a giant need something that's reoccurring, and groups are developing solutions.
Right.
Please.
So in the state of Florida, our structure is not quite that same way. We have what's called SART. That's the State Agricultural Response Team, and it's a state through the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So it's very similar where they meet regularly and they have this response team. I mean, that's what it's called, SORT. But as far as I know, they haven't been deployed to other states. But it is really to set up a specific team that can respond wherever the disaster may be in the state of Florida. And it could be more than just what we're talking about, hurricanes and floods, but also pandemic-related issues too, or any type of infectious disease outbreak in the state, both mainly livestock that as well. So.
It's interesting too, in the U.S. there is the EDEN, Extension Disaster Education Network, and so most extension systems have representatives to that organization. They meet regularly for these. So I'm thinking, obviously the United States is a large developed country with lots of resources, so states can share resources with each other, or within states they can share resources. I'm wondering if any of you have any frame of reference or understanding of, in smaller developing countries that have minimal capacity within their own country, are there regional networks across country lines that may contribute to responding? Anybody have any awareness of any of those things happening? I mean, I know that there are the regional Caribbean or the regional extension networks, like the Caribbean Extension Group, and then I know there are several of those around the world, but I don't know. I mean, you guys know the climate change projections as well as I do. The prevalence of disasters and severe weather events are increasing across the world for sure. Absolutely.
Well, just to add, for certain, there is regional groupings of extension systems around the world. The Caribbean one you mentioned, VELAS there for Latin America, and then there's a FAS, there's from all the regions of the world, and they exchange things, but I don't know if it's a daily network on crisis response, but they have events like this, let's say, where they exchange information.
That's great. As Grady said, that this will continue, and will probably get even worse with, it's not just hurricanes but droughts, wildfires, flooding that we're going to see.
We have Katrina, what, another 5 minutes maybe?
7 minutes.
7 minutes.
Yes.
Just a brief question. I've done a little bit of work in emergency management. I've worked with an organization in Pensacola, Florida. We were more in charge of volunteers. But what does emergency response, emergency management look like in Trinidad in terms of what the extension agents do?
Well, they are going back to boots on the ground, part of what they do is, with the response, is that they deal with all the paperwork or the forms that the farmers have to complete, getting to the farmers. And so from what Moses was able to find, even the training on how to do that. And so the forms and things I forget the actual name for it, but the farmers have to fill out all the forms to be able to potentially get reimbursed for the disaster impacts. And so not knowing how to do that, they're part of that process. And then also just working with the farmers to make sure that everything is cataloged too. We do something similar to that in Florida, is that our what's called Food Resource Economics, our Ag Economics Department focuses on what the disaster impact is on agriculture, for example. And so you'll hear reports on the impact of a hurricane or disaster on what it meant for Florida. They do something similar there in Trinidad as well.
Is there a FEMA equivalent, or is that all for farmers specifically? Is that all handled through the Department of Agriculture there?
They have a Ministry of Agriculture, which would be, I guess, similar to our U.S. Department of Agriculture there. And so all that is funneled through their Ministry of Agriculture.
Thank you.
Additional questions, comments?
As we expect that climate change is going to increase and it's going to have more impacts, how is the extension responding to this, and what are the competencies that needs to be built on extension to be able to adapt and prepare?
That is a great question, and I go back to refer to what Grady, Dr. Roberts has just said about Eden, the Extension Disaster Education Network. I'm talking about the United States right now. We can talk, internationally in just a second. But Eden just had its national meeting last week in Tucson, Arizona, and so there's a lot of talk right now. I mean, Eden has been around for several years, and there's an Eden representative in every state. Some have more than one representative. Some of them have not only in terms of land, but also in terms of sea. So there's also coastal Eden representatives. And so a lot of the discussion now is how can we be even more effective in not only communicating and preparing for disasters, but also what the recovery would be and what is Extension's role internationally in the United States. I would go back to what you said before about having the same discussion on the geographic regional basis, and how we might be able to bring that about too. And I know that Angie Lindsey at the University of Florida is the Eden representative for Florida. And so she is taking one of the leadership roles there and doing research on how can we prepare our extension faculty in the United States to be able to be better first responders too. So I can't speak for her, but I will. But I think that she would be interested in how can we have this conversation even more in terms of an international component, because we have extension faculty in different extension systems around the world, and what can we do to help prepare our extension faculty internationally. So going back to your question about what are those competencies, there's research being done on that right now. There have been individual studies, but there's a national study being done with Dr. Lindsey that's going to be looking at some of those specific areas about how can we be better at preparing our extension representatives in the U.S. So if you'd like to learn more, get with me and I'll be able to get you connected with that. You're welcome.
Additional questions or comments?
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, let's thank Ricky for